You guys, it's currently snowing outside. I've got my little coffee and we are just gonna sit back, relax, and I'm gonna talk to you guys about my top favorite books of 2022. And at the very end of the video, I'm gonna add in my least favorite books of the year. Because I didn't wanna like add too many just because I feel like it's more important to focus on my favorite books of the year because obviously then you guys, like I want you guys to read them. But then I was like, you know what? I might as well add in some of my least favorite books. Just in case maybe they were on your list to read and I can save you some pain from having to read them. Also, I wrote them all down on my iPad just so I would have little notes. So if you see me looking at something, that's what I'm looking at. This is all in chronological order from like the very beginning of the year to the end of the year. Starting off strong, we have Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. I freaking loved this book. This one was one of my first books that I read last year that I was like, holy shit, this is a 5-star read. I could not even put this down. It was one of those books where I read this on my Kindle or else I'd show you, but it was one of those books where I would even like wake up in the morning and like want to read it because I just wanted to know what happened in the end. It's the classic second chance at love type of story, and like if you've been watching my videos, you know I'm a sucker for like second chance at love. Like they grew up together and then they part ways and then they find each other again. Okay, so this one starts out and we've got two timelines going on at the same time. So like one timeline is present day and I think it's like 10 years after they had last spoken to each other, and they meet in a coffee shop and she's engaged to get married. And like we don't really know like what his life is like, but that's where they are now. And then we kind of get like flashbacks of when they first like fell in love. You see them as like children and then teenagers, and then you kind of like see their falling out. But it's like a huge question mark on why they broke up. But then like that's like the twist at the end, and it's just so good. Like I feel like the chemistry in this book, like you can just feel it. Like it just like comes alive in the pages, you know what I mean? But yeah, like it's literally one of those books that like just, it gives you butterflies and it makes you feel all like warm and just like gushy inside, you know? I love it. Anyway, that's a must read. If you are like looking for a romance book, 100%, you gotta read it. I know that it's all over TikTok, and it's one of those books that even though it's all over TikTok, it's worth the hype. Like I feel like sometimes it's like you can't trust TikTok sometimes, but I'm telling you guys, this one's worth your time. Next up, I just kind of threw this one in because I read this one in like a day, and because I thought it was so good. Well, okay. It's not that I thought it was so good, it's that like it was so steamy. It just hooked me. And it's Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. This one, I wrote this in my Goodreads one, but I was like, if a guy ever treats you like this in real life, run. Run for the hills. Don't stick around. It's probably not gonna work out, but reading it, yes. So basically they started out, they didn't like each other, and then they obviously like their chemistry was just like, the sparks were flying. And so he has like 2 rules that he goes by, and one of them is it was like, never ask about the past and don't expect a future, which is like kind of cringy, but it's a fun book. I would say that it's like, it definitely hooks you because it's so like steamy, and yeah, that one definitely, if you're looking for just like a lighthearted, hot book, you know, for the winter time, 100% read Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. Next up, we have One Italian Summer. First of all, I love Rebecca Searles. Is that how you say her last name? I love Rebecca Searles' work. She wrote In 5 Years, and I loved that book. Like I recommended that book to everyone. I thought it was so good. When I saw that she released a new book, One Italian Summer, I was like, I gotta read it. Like she does such a good job at making these really unrealistic stories feel so real. So like this one, I feel like the theme is really like mother-daughter relationships. And so her mom recently passed away, and they had this trip planned to go to Positano together because when the mom was like, I think like 30, she spent like 6 months there or something, and just like kind of like changed who she was as a person. And so they were gonna go together, and then the mom was like gonna show her around like Positano. Anyway, as we know, her mom had passed away. She decides to go on the trip anyway, and she was like having problems in her marriage and all that jazz. Anyway, gets to Positano and then meets like the 30-year-old version of her mom, but obviously her mom does not know that like that's her future daughter. And then they kind of just like explore Positano together. And it's honestly, it's heartwarming. And I feel like it just makes you think a lot about like, you know, your family dynamics and your family relationships and how we view people and like the complexity of life and all that stuff. So I really liked it. Just a very heartwarming book. Okay, next up we have One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I did like a deep dive this year, I feel like, into Taylor Jenkins Reid's old books. So like, as we all know, like Evelyn Hugo, Malibu Rising, and Daisy Jones and the Six. But I was like, you know what, I bet that I would love her old books because I just love the way that she writes. So this one was a roller coaster of emotion, and I actually like really love this book. So it starts off with Jesse and Emma, and then we see them like grow up together. This is on the back of the book, so I'm not spoiling anything, okay? We see them fall in love, and then they like travel the world together, and they are like goals. Like they are just a great couple. I love them. I literally was rooting for them, and even though I knew what was gonna happen next, which was Jesse like goes missing because he's like a travel photographer, and his helicopter goes down, goes missing for years. So then Emma is obviously devastated, has to rebuild her life, then goes back home, falls in love with someone from like their high school, and they're engaged when Jesse is found. So now we kind of see like, what does Emma do? She's figuring out like her dynamic with Jesse, because technically they're still married because they never got a divorce because they thought, like everyone thought he died. So it's just a wild ride, and I honestly was so torn on who I wanted her to end up with, but overall, just a really crazy good book, but also like very emotional. So like, keep that in mind. Next up, we have my first, well, this wasn't the first nonfiction book that I read this year, but I feel like this year I kind of like took a step back from reading a lot of like nonfiction books, because if you know me, you know that like I love my nonfiction books, but I feel like I didn't really find a lot that like stood out to me that like I really wanted to read this year. But I was listening to the I was listening to the Jay Shetty On Purpose podcast, and like that's one of my favorite podcasts, and he had Joe Dispenza on, and they were talking about just like the mind and how we can almost like rewire our brains. And so then I picked up his book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, and I actually listened to this one because over the summer I was like driving a lot to the beach, so I listened to this one on an audiobook, which like I had never really done. Way back in the day, I actually listened to the Twilight audiobooks on YouTube, which is like so random, but I swear to God, that was probably the last audiobook that I read, and I was like maybe 12. Anyway, just like a random fact. So I was like listening to it over the summer, and I actually really enjoyed it because it bridges the gap, I feel like, between like spirituality and science, and talks about like quantum physics, and which like sounds really kind of like out there, but the way that he describes it, it's very understandable, and he talks a lot about like meditating. And I feel like over the summer, like last year in general, I was just like, I feel like I was in a funk for like the entire year almost. I didn't feel like myself. I don't know, I was just really like, I was going through it. I feel like this was like a stepping stone into kind of like helping me deal with like the negative thoughts that I was having, and definitely an interesting book if you are into that stuff, or like kind of just like want to read it and like have an open mind about that stuff. Like his work is really interesting. Next up, we have a totally different kind of genre, and it's a thriller book. The very best thriller book that I think I have ever read, and I happened to read it last year, is The Silent Patient. Oh my God, you guys, I was hooked. I feel like everyone talks about this book, and it is with good reason, because it is a crazy book and literally would just like get you hooked. Basically, it's about this woman, Alicia, and she lives in London with her husband. She is like an artist, very normal life. One day, shoots her husband 5 times in the face. Then goes like completely silent, like doesn't say a word to anyone, not even in court. They send her away to like, I think like some type of like mental institutional prison type of thing. We're reading this through the eyes of this guy, Theo, who's a criminal psychotherapist, and he is like determined to kind of like figure out why she shot her husband, and also like try to like get her to talk again, because he apparently is like the best in the field. We go on this journey with him, and it's just freaking nuts. So highly recommend. Next up, we have another thriller book, which I love. And this one was not as like well written, I would say, as A Silent Patient, but the plot is nuts. Like, it's literally crazy. So this one's called The Perfect Marriage by Geneva Rose. I literally read this in one day over the summer. I swear to God, I started it probably like midday. Had to stay up until like 2 o'clock in the morning just so I could finish this book. It's about this couple, Sarah, who's like a very famous defense attorney, and then we've got her husband, who's a writer who owns a second house, like a lake house, so he can like write his stories. But he was having an affair using the house like that he was like using to write. And one day, his mistress is found dead in their house. And then guess who has to defend him in court? His wife. And so Sarah like finds out about this like as he like needs a defense attorney, and it is just wild trying to figure out like how this mistress died in the first place, and then like, you know, is he guilty, is he not, who killed her? It's nuts. It was crazy. Next up, we have another romance book, and it's Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. I swear to God, you guys, this one is like the book of the summer. I feel like this is like, to me, this is like the epitome of like a summer romance book. You need to put this on your list for like this upcoming summer because it is the ultimate beach read. Like, you just want to crack open this one on the beach or like near a pool and just like sit in the sun and read this because immaculate vibes. Okay, so this one is another one of those like second chance at love type of stories, which, as we know, I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for a second chance at love story. But this one's told over 6 years and then 1 weekend. So we've got another like dual timeline. They also like grew up together. They were like childhood sweethearts, and we kind of like see them like fall in love, and then something happens. And then they like, this current day weekend is because she gets invited back to like their lake town where Sam, like the guy, lives, and his mom had passed away. And so she gets invited back to go to the funeral. And so then they kind of like rehash everything that like went down, and it is so good, so juicy. Another one of those like very just like your heart melts while you're reading it. It's so cute. Okay. So, last book of my favorites that I'm going to mention is another nonfiction book, and it's The Power of Your Subconscious Mind. You guys, I talked about this in one of my vlogs, but I swear to God, this one was another one of those like very easy to digest, where it talks a lot about like your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, and like where our beliefs come from, and just like how to almost like take control of like your thoughts and your like negative assumptions. And I just found myself just like loving it. I did not expect to like love it because I thought it was just gonna be, I don't know, kind of boring. I thought it was just gonna be boring, but I ended up really enjoying it. And I feel like it definitely stems off of the first book I was telling you guys about, like the Joe Dispenza book. I feel like I'm not gonna do a good job at like describing this book to you guys, so I'm just gonna say you gotta read it. You just gotta read it, and then we can discuss it. I don't know, it was definitely one of those books that I found myself going back and like rereading different passages so I could like really like make it stick, you know? But yeah, highly recommend. Thought it was really good. Okay, now we have part 2 of the video, and it is my least favorites. I only picked out 3 because I was like, you know, sometimes I feel bad bashing books online, but I was like, you know what? These are fair game because I didn't like them. And I feel like I'm just gonna tell you guys about it, so. Anyway, number 1 book that I really just despised was Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. And I know that this book is like really famous on TikTok and people love this book. And you guys, I wanted to love this book. Like, I went into it thinking, because people were like, oh my God, this is like such a good romance book. And like, I love a good romance book. But you guys, I was gravely disappointed by this book. I just felt like this book had so much potential because the plot was there. It was like an interesting storyline because I think if I remember correctly, like the guy couldn't talk or something. Like there was something like that had happened that he couldn't talk. And then this girl moves to a new town, and then like she like befriends him, and he's kind of like the outsider, which is like sounds like it'd be such a like an interesting story, right? But I just felt like it was like cheesy and cringy, and it was just like I just really like I couldn't even finish it, honestly. Like I really was like skimming through the pages. I was like, oh my God, like I need to just like finish this book just so I can. It just didn't do it for me. And I feel bad if like that's like one of your favorite books, but I didn't like it. Okay, next up we have Station 11. And I loved the TV show, and that's why I read the book in the first place, because I was so excited. I was like, I loved the TV show so much. I rewatched it twice. And so I was like, you know what? I bet the book is like just as good, because usually book to movie or like book to TV show like adaptations, the book is always better. Not in this case. This was probably the worst book I've ever written or I've ever read, because the timeline was just out of whack. Nothing made sense. I was just like, how are these people even connected? But it was like, which like made it hard to follow, because in the TV show, like you can see how everyone's kind of like connected in the very end, but the book was just like, there was no point. There was no point in the book, and it was just like kind of stupid. So yeah, don't recommend reading Station 11. But the TV show is really good. Okay, last one is a bit of a controversial one. That's why I saved it for last. So like if you're still watching the video, then you can know this little piece of tea that I don't like this book. And It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. And before people get mad at me, I feel like this book just had so much, again, like potential, and like the hype around this book I feel like was, because like I was an OG fan of It Ends With Us. I read it back in like 2018. I loved it. Like I loved the story. That's why it's like I couldn't wait for It Starts With Us, but I just feel like it was like, and I understand why she like wrote it the way that she did. She wanted it to be like a cute book. I feel like, okay, here's my 2 cents. I feel like if she made this book, instead of it being directly after Atlas and I'm blanking on the girl's character name. But if she had made it instead, like not right after they had met, because like we all know that they were gonna fall in love and that they were gonna like, you know, end up together. I think it would have been interesting if she started it with the, like her daughter, like years from now, like falling in love, you know? And like that to me would have been really interesting. Like how are they as parents? You know, like, I don't know. I just think that that would have been really interesting to see, but that one kind of, again, fell flat for me. So not that you shouldn't read it, like read it if you want to, but it wasn't like my favorite book ever, and I was like really excited for it. So I feel like that kind of, you know, when you're like you're really excited for something, then you read it and you're like, this didn't live up to the excitement that I had in my head. But anyway, that is it for my favorite / least favorite books of 2022. But yeah, let me know if you guys have read any of these, your thoughts. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video.